It was the kind of night that made people disappear behind their umbrellas. The rain wasn't just falling, it was crashing, a cold, relentless storm hammering the city streets like the world was trying to wash itself clean. Most people hurried past the accident. They didn't stop to look. Didn't slow down. Didn't care. Just another body on the sidewalk, another drunk, another mess no one wanted to touch. But she saw it. 17 minutes past 9 p.m., Lena, a 24-year-old waitress, was walking home from her double shift. Her back ached. Her shoes were soaked. Her coat was too thin for a storm like this. The tip she earned today barely covered a half sack of rice. Still, she didn't complain. She never did. That's when she noticed something strange on the edge of the road, barely a shape, like a sack of clothes thrown beside a street lamp. Then she saw it move. A hand twitched. She dropped her umbrella. The world seemed to freeze around her. Blood. There was blood mixing with the rain, trickling from a man's forehead, dripping down his cheek and into the gutter. He was alive. And no one had stopped. Lena looked around. Cars zoomed by, splashing dirty water, their headlights blinding but heartless. A taxi nearly ran over the man's foot. She screamed and threw herself into the road, arms out. Stop. Please, stop. He's still breathing. A horn blared. Tires screeched. A delivery van came to a halt just inches away. The driver cursed and rolled down the window. What the hell are you doing? Help me, she shouted. This man needs an ambulance. The driver hesitated, then got out. Together, they lifted the man. He was unconscious, freezing, dressed in torn jeans and an oversized hoodie that looked 2 decades old. No phone. No ID. Just a deep gash on his head and a pulse that faded too fast. They got him into the van. Lena climbed in with him, her knees trembling. The van sped through the rain while she held the stranger's head in her lap, pressing her scarf to his wound. Don't die, she whispered. You can't die tonight. Not like this. At the hospital, the emergency room smelled like antiseptic and sorrow. Nurses rushed him in, shouting vitals, prepping for scans. Lena followed closely behind. Are you family? A nurse asked. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Yes. It was a lie. But if she didn't say it, they might leave him to rot in a hallway, just another nameless man. She gave her name and a fake story. Said she was his cousin. The hospital didn't question much, they were used to ghosts showing up at night. The man had no identification, no phone, and no fingerprints in the system. Car accident, one nurse whispered. No. No car. No wallet. No address. Maybe homeless. Maybe. But Lena didn't believe that. She'd seen homeless men before. This one, something was different. Even unconscious, there was something composed about him. His hands were rough, but not broken. His skin was pale, but clean. His jawline, sharp. A man not from the gutters, but someone who somehow landed there. The first night Lena stayed until dawn. She couldn't sleep, not after what she saw. That face haunted her. Not because of how he looked, but because of how the world ignored him. If she had come just 30 seconds later, he would have died in the cold. The doctors said he had trauma to the head and internal bruising. He might not wake up for days, weeks, maybe ever. Still, she came back the next day. And the day after. Each time, she brought something small, clean socks, a book, flowers from the street vendor. She even read to him old poetry from her notebook. It made her feel like she was talking to someone who mattered. It made her feel less invisible. Who was he? On the third day, she asked the nurse, "No one has come looking for him?" The nurse shook her head. Not a single call. No friends. No family. Either he has no one, or they don't care. Lena's chest tightened. How could someone so young be so forgotten? She began to talk to him like he could hear her. Hey, stranger, you scared me that night. But I'm glad I found you. Maybe you're a secret agent, or a runaway prince. Or maybe you just needed someone to see you for once. She laughed softly. The stranger didn't move. But in his sleep, a tear rolled down his cheek. The city moved on, but she didn't. Outside, the city kept rushing. People passed the hospital like it didn't exist. Everyone chasing something: money, survival, escape. But Lena kept coming back. Why? Because she knew what it felt like to be invisible. To be nothing. To be the girl no one remembered, no one thanked, no one waited for. And maybe, just maybe, this stranger needed someone who wouldn't give up. Even if he never woke up. Even if he never remembered her. Lena wasn't the type of girl who made headlines. She didn't have a college degree, a massive following on social media, or a fairy tale life. But she did have something most people had lost in the rush of survival: a heart that hadn't hardened. Her day started before the sun. By 6 a.m., she had already boiled water for tea, ironed her brother Rafi's school uniform, and packed him a humble lunch: leftover rice and 2 boiled eggs. She didn't eat breakfast herself. She hadn't in 3 weeks. Rafi, 12 years old and full of quiet gratitude, never asked questions. He knew his sister skipped meals so he wouldn't have to. Didi, he'd say gently, I can eat at school. Lena would always smile. I know. But you shouldn't have to. The daily grind after dropping him at the local government school, she walked 20 minutes to a small, family-run restaurant where she worked as a waitress. The place was humble, the chairs uneven, the kitchen barely clean, but it paid just enough to keep their room. Lena worked 2 shifts. She served food to men who often ignored her, barked orders, or flirted in ways that made her stomach twist. She kept her head down, stayed polite, and smiled through it all. By the end of each night, her hands smelled of garlic and dish soap, and her feet ached so badly she'd limp on the way home. But she never complained. Because she had a goal: to see Rafi graduate high school. To give him the life she never got. To keep the promise she made to their mother before she died. The world didn't see her kindness, but she gave it anyway. Every evening, on her way home, Lena would stop near the old temple wall where a cluster of stray cats gathered. She always carried scraps, fish bones, dry bread, whatever she could save from work. The cats would meow and rub against her legs. She'd laugh and call them by names only she knew: Chintu, Ronnie, Baba. Some nights, she'd stop to help the blind beggar who sat outside the pharmacy. She never gave him money, she didn't have any to spare. But she'd hold his hand, guide him across the street, sometimes even sit beside him just to talk. He once said, "You're the only person who doesn't treat me like a ghost." She replied, "That's because I am one too." Why she stayed at the hospital? The stranger in the coma didn't owe her anything. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't even conscious. But Lena had this unspoken rule: if you can help someone, you should. Especially when no one else will. So, after every shift, even if it was midnight or past 1 a.m., she would walk to the hospital. The nurses started to recognize her. Some smiled, others frowned, perhaps questioning her obsession. But Lena didn't care what they thought. She brought little things: a blanket she washed herself, a small potted plant to put on the window, a battery-operated fan for his corner of the ward. She even wrote his name on a sticky note and stuck it on his bed: Mr. Stranger, fight to come back. I believe in you. The hospital staff began to whisper. One nurse, Priya, asked her gently one night, "You really don't know who he is?" Lena shook her head. "I found him on the road. That's all." Priya was skeptical. "He looks Different. Not like the street people. Look at his nails. His skin. Something tells me he's not just some homeless guy. Lena had wondered the same thing. The man's hands were calloused, yes, but his skin was smooth. His hair had been cut recently, no lice, no rough beard. His boots, though muddy, were high-quality leather. And even though he was unconscious, there was a quiet strength in him. Like he was someone used to giving orders, not taking them. Still, Lena said nothing. She wasn't here to solve a mystery. She was here because she refused to be the kind of person who looked away. The viral moment, but she didn't know yet. One evening, a young medical intern was scrolling through his phone when he noticed Lena sitting beside the stranger's bed, reading softly from a book of poetry. The man was still in a coma, connected to 4 drips and monitors, but she read with care, turning each page slowly. The intern took a photo, just one. He posted it online with the caption, "She says she's not related to him. She visits every night anyway. I don't know who she is. But I think this is what real love looks like." The post began to gain traction. Thousands of likes. Hundreds of shares. People were moved by the mystery of the nameless girl and the man she refused to give up on. But Lena had no idea. She didn't even own a smartphone. The rent crisis back home, trouble was brewing. Her landlord knocked late one evening. "You're 2 weeks behind," he said, arms crossed. "I just need time. I promise, I'll pay. You keep wasting your nights at that hospital. You want to save a dying man but can't even save your own rent?" Lena said nothing. Just nodded, bit her lip, and quietly shut the door. She didn't tell Rafi. She didn't cry. But that night, she skipped dinner again. And the next morning, she wrapped the last bit of sugar in newspaper and left it outside her neighbor's door. The woman had 4 children and no husband. Lena still gave what little she had. Because kindness wasn't a luxury to her. It was a duty. Whispers in the ward. By now, the stranger had been in a coma for 10 days. Still no name. No identification. No visitors. The media hadn't picked up the story yet, but inside the hospital, staff had started referring to him as Lena's mystery man. They watched her bring him food he couldn't eat, tell him stories he couldn't hear, and pray beside him like he was her own blood. One nurse whispered, "If I were in a coma, I'd want her beside me too." And someone else said, "Whoever he is, if he wakes up, he better marry that girl." Lena didn't hear those whispers. She was too busy whispering into the silence, "You're not alone. I see you. I believe in you. Please come back." Lena didn't think of herself as a hero. She never once imagined her small act of kindness would turn into something more. All she knew was this: every time she looked at the man in the hospital bed, still, silent, in a sleep no one could explain, she couldn't walk away. But now, the world was beginning to notice. The pressure starts. It started with a letter from the hospital. Printed on white paper with formal words and zero warmth. Due to extended hospitalization and lack of verifiable identification, the administration may transfer the patient to a long-term facility pending available space. If no guardian claims responsibility, patient care may be downgraded to standard-level services. Lena folded the letter slowly, heart pounding. Transferring him would mean losing him to a nameless ward, underfunded and forgotten. He wouldn't wake up to the same clean sheets. No daily flower. No kind voice reading poetry. Just sterile air and flickering lights. She couldn't let that happen. She took the letter, climbed the 3 floors to the admin office, and begged. "I'll stay responsible. I'll sign whatever I need to. Just don't move him." The administrator looked her up and down. Torn sandals. Wrinkled kurta. Hair pulled back in a tired bun. "You're not even family," he said bluntly. "Why are you doing this?" I don't know, she replied honestly. But I'd want someone to fight for me, too. The online storm 2 days later, the intern's photo of her went viral. 1 million views. Thousands of comments poured in, "Angels still walk among us. We need more people like her. What if this is true love and he wakes up one day? She's probably doing it for attention." Some people romanticized her. Others accused her of clout chasing. A few claimed it was staged. Lena didn't know. She didn't even own a smartphone. Her old keypad phone didn't even have a camera. But the hospital staff started whispering. A local reporter showed up and asked questions. "Why do you visit him? Do you know who he is? What if he wakes up and doesn't want you here?" She had no answers. Only one truth: he was lying there bleeding. "I couldn't just leave." A stranger returns. A man in a gray suit visited the hospital one morning. He claimed to be from social services. Said he came to check on the viral coma patient. But he asked strange questions. "How long have you known him? Have you touched anything he owns? Did he mention anything before he collapsed?" Lena frowned. He was unconscious. He didn't say anything. The man left his card and walked away, eyes narrow. The nurses whispered that he wasn't from social services at all, but from a private investigation firm. It raised questions no one could answer. Who was this man she saved? Why were people looking for him now? And why hadn't anyone come forward earlier? Home grows heavy back home. Things weren't easier. Rafi's school books were falling apart. The landlord had slipped another warning notice under the door. And the restaurant where she worked had reduced her hours, claiming low sales, but clearly annoyed she kept leaving early for the hospital. "You think the city runs on fairy tales?" her manager had snapped. "You're a waitress, Lena. Not a savior." That night, as she counted the coins in her tea tin, she realized they had just enough for either a week of groceries or rent. She chose groceries. And yet, the next morning, she bought a small sunflower from a street child and placed it beside the stranger's bed. He didn't stir. But she swore his fingers twitched. An unexpected message: a nurse approached her quietly one evening. "You're not safe here anymore." Lena's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "People are talking. Some think you know more than you say. Others think you're using him." She laughed bitterly. "Using him for what? I'm the one skipping meals." The nurse softened. "I know. But rumors grow fast. Especially now that the photo is everywhere." Another nurse showed her a news headline on their phone: "The mystery girl beside the sleeping millionaire." Millionaire? Lena blinked. They think he's rich? No one knows for sure. But some say his boots cost more than our month's salary. That night, she stared at his face for a long time. "Who are you? And why does it feel like the whole world is hiding your truth?" A letter with no name. 3 days later, she found an envelope tucked under his pillow. No stamp. No sender. Just her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Stop visiting. He doesn't belong to you. This isn't your story." Her hands trembled. For the first time in days, she cried, not out of fear, but heartbreak. She never wanted anything from him. Not money. Not fame. Not even a thank you. She just wanted him to live. But she kept coming despite the whispers. Despite the warnings. Despite the threats. She kept coming. She read to him in a soft voice her childhood favorites, letters she'd never sent to anyone, poems she'd scribbled on tissue paper. She held his hand when the machines beeped too loud. She smoothed his blanket when the nurses were too busy. And every time she left, she whispered, "If the world forgets you, I won't." The man's body responds on the 17th day. Something changed. She was reading to him when she saw his eyelids flicker, not once, but twice. Then, his hand shifted. His chest rose with more force. The heart monitor beat slowed, then steadied. Lena gasped, calling the nurse. Within moments, doctors swarmed the room. She stepped back, eyes wide. Was it happening? Was he waking up? The beeping of the monitor shifted rhythm. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, like the soft hum of a new song. But to Lena, who had listened to this machine every single day for more than 2 weeks, the change was thunder. She looked up from her chair, book still open in her lap. The stranger's face twitched. A muscle in his cheek jerked, then his fingers, resting gently on the blanket, curled ever so slightly. Lena's heart stopped. Then it happened again, this time, more clearly. His eyes moved beneath closed lids. His lips parted slightly, like a word was about to form. "Doctor," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "Nurse! He's moving!" In seconds, the room flooded with white coats and gloved hands. The machines were checked, the lights were brightened, and for the first time in 17 days, the man they thought might never return opened his eyes. He blinked slowly, confused. His pupils shifted left and right, then squinted at the ceiling. His breaths were shallow, uneven. The nurse leaned over him gently. "Can you hear me, sir?" The man looked at her, then at the wires in his arms, then at the oxygen tubes. He didn't respond. He scanned the room with panic rising in his eyes. "Sir," the doctor said calmly, "you're in a hospital. You were injured. You've been in a coma." The man's lips moved. His voice was hoarse, like dried leaves brushing against stone. "WH? Where? Where am I?" "You're safe," the doctor reassured him. "You've had a serious accident. Do you remember your name?" He looked around again. Then at his own hands. Then at Lena, who stood quietly in the corner, watching with wide eyes and trembling hands. "My name," he murmured, then closed his eyes again as though searching for something inside his mind. But nothing came. He didn't remember who he was. Not his name. Not his address. Not his job. Not even what day it was. He couldn't remember the accident. Couldn't remember falling. Couldn't remember being saved. It was as if his entire life had been wiped clean, an empty book waiting to be written again. Lena stood frozen as the medical team gently restrained his arms to stop him from pulling at the 4 lines. The doctors whispered about trauma-induced amnesia and said that it could be temporary or permanent. For the first time since he woke up, the man turned toward Lena. His eyes locked with hers. Something flickered. Recognition? Confusion? Maybe it was just a reflex. But to her, it felt like a jolt of electricity. She smiled faintly. "You're awake," she whispered. He stared at her. Then his eyebrows furrowed. Do I know you?" Lena's smile faltered for a moment. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "But I know you." The doctors advised limited interaction while they assessed his condition. But Lena refused to leave completely. She sat a few feet away, quietly knitting or reading, careful not to overwhelm him. She didn't tell him how many nights she had stayed beside him. Didn't say how she found him. Didn't tell him about the letter or the online post or the rumors swirling like a storm outside these walls. He asked simple questions at first. Why am I here? What happened to me? Who are you? And each time, Lena answered gently. You were found hurt. No one knew who you were. I saw you and brought you here. And you? I was just passing by. As the days passed, the man grew stronger physically, but his mind was still a fog. Some memories came in flashes, blurred images of ocean waves, champagne glasses, a sleek black car, voices in boardrooms, loud phone calls, a woman's laugh that made him wince in pain. One day, he stared at the wall for nearly an hour, then whispered, "I think I was important." "Everyone is important," Lena said.
"No, I think I was someone powerful. Or wealthy. I don't know. I feel like I used to command people." Lena didn't comment. But deep down, she had known it all along. His face, his posture, his eyes, this man wasn't just some stranger from the street. He came from somewhere high up. Somewhere far from her world. And yet, he was here. With no memory. No power. No wealth. Only her. One afternoon, a knock came at the hospital room door.
A man in a crisp suit entered, followed by a sharply dressed woman.
Their expressions were tight, professional.
The man stepped forward and spoke calmly.
"Mr. Ethan Crawford?"
The stranger blinked.
"Is that my name?"
"Yes,"
the man replied.
"You are Ethan R. Crawford,
CEO of CRN Technologies. You went missing 2 weeks ago after a business conference.
Your car was found abandoned near a construction site."
Ethan's face paled.
The man continued.
"I'm Simon. Your legal advisor.
This is Ms. Patel, your private nurse.
We've been looking everywhere for you." Lena sat frozen. CEO? CRN Technologies? The Ethan Crawford? One of the youngest tech millionaires in the city.
She had heard of the company, but never imagined that the man she saved, the one she read poetry to, was its powerful leader. Her breath caught in her throat.
Ethan turned toward her.
"You saved me," he whispered.
Lena shook her head. I just found you."
The room shifted.
Simon nodded politely at her. "Thank you for your help, Miss Lena."
"Well, Miss Lena, your kindness has been noted. We will take over Mr. Crawford's care now."
It was said gently.
But the message was clear.
"You may go now. Your part is over." Lena looked at Ethan one last time.
He was sitting up straighter now, alert. A powerful man beginning to fit back into his role. She gave him a soft smile.
"I'm glad you're okay." And then, quietly, she left the room.
The hallway outside felt colder than usual.
She didn't cry. Not there. Not yet.
But her heart felt heavy. She had known from the beginning that she wasn't a part of his world.
Still, it hurt being erased so easily.
Being told without words, "You don't belong in this chapter." What she didn't know was that Ethan wasn't letting her go just yet. Because in the haze of his memories, one thing stood clearer than the rest: her voice. The next morning, Ethan Crawford's name was on every television, phone screen, and newspaper front page. Tech millionaire found alive after mysterious disappearance.
Coma patient identified as CRN CEO. Billionaire rescued by unidentified young woman, where is she now? The city buzzed like a beehive.
Everyone had questions, everyone wanted answers. The mystery of the man who vanished and reappeared in a hospital had become a sensation. But amid the swirl of headlines and breaking news, Lena's name was nowhere. She had walked out of the hospital before the reporters arrived.
Quietly. Invisibly.
Just the way she had lived her whole life. Ethan sat upright in his hospital bed, a tablet in hand, reading article after article. His face was blank, but his heart pounded with unease. He recognized photos of himself from award nights, company meetings, press events. He saw his own smile, confident and sharp, standing beside investors and CEOs.
But none of it felt real.
That man, the one in tailored suits and luxury cars, felt like a stranger.
The only memories that didn't feel foreign were the recent ones. The hospital ceiling. The scent of flowers.
The sound of someone reading beside him in the dark. Her voice.
Her hands.
Her laugh when she mispronounced a difficult word.
The way she whispered, "Please come back."
They were the only pieces of his identity that felt true. "Who is she?" he asked his assistant, Simon, that afternoon.
"Who?" Simon looked confused. "The girl who found me.
The one who stayed all those days.
The hospital called her Lena." Simon cleared his throat. "We don't have much on her. No surname. No address.
She hasn't claimed any credit or reward.
It's odd, frankly. We're trying to trace her."
Ethan stared out the window, then looked at Simon again.
"Drop everything else," he said quietly. "I need to find her." Back in her small rented room, Lena avoided the television.
She had returned to work. Quietly, back to her tables and trays, pretending nothing had changed. Her co-workers asked if the man in the news was her coma patient. She shrugged.
"I only helped. That's all."
But her eyes betrayed her. When she was alone, she rewatched the video someone had sent her, a news clip showing Ethan walking out of the hospital gates surrounded by bodyguards and flashing cameras.
He looked healthy. Whole. Powerful. Exactly as she imagined he'd be when he recovered.
And nothing like the man she used to talk to in the quiet hours of the night.
He hadn't mentioned her name. Not in any interview. She didn't blame him. Why would a man like him remember a girl like her? But he did. Every single day.
Within a week, Ethan had organized a press conference, not for his company, not for shareholders, but for a very personal mission. The room was packed with journalists, camera crews, and online influencers hungry for soundbites. Ethan adjusted the mic, looked straight into the flashing lights, and said, "I'm grateful to be alive. I know now that someone found me when I was near death. Someone who stayed by my side, even when she didn't know who I was.
Someone who saved me in more ways than one." He paused. "I don't know where she is. But if Lena is listening, I remember your voice. I remember your kindness. I remember everything. And I want to thank you, in person." The clip went viral within hours. #FindLena started trending worldwide. People shared her photo, just one grainy image from the hospital days, where she was seen sitting beside Ethan's bed, reading a book with a soft smile. Messages poured in. "She deserves the world. If he doesn't marry her, I will. Real love doesn't need memories to feel real." Still, Lena didn't come forward. She was scared. The attention. The spotlight. The judgment. Her life wasn't made for that. She wasn't the girl who walked red carpets. She was the girl who hand-washed her brother's uniform and skipped dinner to pay for rent. She didn't belong in his world. Even if her heart screamed otherwise. One rainy evening, as she walked home from work, she found the little pharmacy beggar, the blind man she used to guide every other day, holding a newspaper. He couldn't see it, of course, but he was smiling wide. "They're looking for you, you know," he said, as if sensing her presence. Lena froze. "What do you mean?" "Your boy. The one in the coma. I heard it on the radio. He said your name." Lena looked away. Her eyes stung. "You're special, child," the man said, reaching for her hand. "Don't hide from your blessings." The next morning, Ethan arrived at the hospital again, not as a patient, but as a visitor. He walked to the same room. The bed was empty now. But the sunflower was still there, wilting in the corner, in the same cheap plastic vase she'd left behind. He smiled. She was real. She wasn't just a dream.
And he hadn't imagined her.
He picked up the sunflower, gently tracing the stem with his fingers.
"Find her," he said to Simon, who stood behind him.
"No matter how long it takes. I owe her my life." But what Ethan didn't know was that Lena had already decided. She was going to disappear.
Because love, in her world, didn't come with luxury.
It came quietly. Silently. The way she lived.
She had given everything she had to save a man she didn't know. And now, she was ready to let him go. 1 week had passed since Ethan Crawford's public appeal. His inbox was flooded.
Reporters chased every lead. Influencers speculated.
PR teams scrambled to filter the chaos. But no one had found her. The city that once ignored her now wanted her back. But Lena, the girl who saved a millionaire and walked away like it meant nothing, had become a ghost again. She changed her route to work. Switched to night shifts. Her brother Rafi didn't even know what was going on. She had hidden the newspaper clippings under her mattress and erased the video sent by a coworker.
Lena wasn't hiding from Ethan.
She was hiding from the world that would ask her questions she couldn't answer.
What do you want from him? Are you chasing fame? Do you expect a reward? Why didn't you come forward sooner?
The answer to all of them was the same: she wanted nothing.
But Ethan wasn't giving up. And fate? It wasn't done with him either. It was raining again.
Not a storm this time, just a soft drizzle that turned the air silver and gentle.
The kind of rain Lena didn't mind walking in.
She had just ended her shift, apron tucked under her arm, and was halfway home when she heard a commotion by the tea stall at the corner. A luxury black car had stopped awkwardly near the curb, drawing curious glances. A few young men stood whispering.
Someone muttered, "He looks like that guy from the news." She didn't even look up. Not until she heard someone say her name. Lena?
She froze.
She knew that voice. Slowly, she turned around. And there he was. Ethan Crawford. No suit. No camera crew. Just him, soaking wet, breathing fast, holding something in his hand. A sunflower. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. She didn't speak. Her heart was thudding in her chest. He stepped closer. "You walked away before I had the chance to say thank you."
"I didn't need thanks," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I only wanted you to live." He nodded. "And I did. Because of you." A pause. Then he held out the flower. "I couldn't forget your voice," he said. "Even when I couldn't remember my own name."
Lena stared at the sunflower, its petals slightly damaged, but still golden, still whole.
Just like her heart.
They walked in silence to the street-side cafe near the bus station. The one she passed every day but never had the money to enter.
He insisted.
They sat at a small table under a tin roof, raindrops tapping rhythmically above their heads.
No luxury. No bodyguards. Just them. Ethan stirred his tea. "Do you know what I remembered first after waking up?" She shook her head. "Your laughter. You read some silly poem and laughed at yourself. I don't even know what it was about. But I remembered how it made me feel safe." Lena smiled, eyes glistening. "I read it to keep you company. You looked lonely." "I was," he said. "More than you know." The conversation flowed.
He asked her about her life, her brother, her dreams. She was hesitant at first, but he listened, not like a millionaire, not like a man looking to reward a savior, but like someone who genuinely wanted to understand her world. She told him about the cats. The blind beggar. The cramped room. Her mother's final words. And he listened like it was poetry. You gave me your time, he said finally.
When I had nothing to give back. You treated me like I mattered, even when I didn't matter to anyone else. That's more valuable than anything I've ever bought. She looked down. You don't owe me anything.
But I want to, he replied.
He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside, there was no check. No property papers. No grand offer. Just a simple printed letter.
Scholarship confirmation for Rafi S. Rahman, full tuition, books, uniform, meals, for the next 5 years.
Lena gasped.
I heard he wants to be a doctor, Ethan said. I figured, he should have the chance to save lives too. Her hands trembled as she held the paper.
You remembered his name? Ethan smiled. You said it once. While reading. And I remembered everything you say.
Tears streamed down her face. She didn't care who saw. As the rain slowed, they walked outside.
The sky was clearing now.
The moon peeked through the clouds like a shy witness.
Lena looked at him. So, what now?
He turned to her, holding her hand gently.
Now. You don't have to disappear. Not anymore.
But I don't fit into your world.
Ethan shook his head. Then I'll step into yours.
And just like that, the rich man didn't rescue the poor girl.
The girl had already done the saving.
What followed wasn't a fairy tale.
It was better. It was real.
Sometimes, the ones who change our lives don't come in luxury cars or expensive suits. Sometimes, they come with nothing but a heart full of kindness. Lena didn't need applause, or cameras, or credit, she just needed to know someone was okay. And in that silent, selfless act, she found everything she didn't know she deserved. If this story touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more emotional true stories, and tap the bell icon so you never miss a moment that might just change your life. Thank you for watching, and always remember, kindness is never wasted.